Hey again, it's Paul Yeager. Welcome inside the MTOM Studio Podcast. Today, we are going to go back into a little bit of that classroom mode. We're going to talk about land values, interest rates, who's buying farmland, what can you do with farmland with a guy who's had perspective for decades, both as a land manager, a farm manager, and then more in the real estate here. Randy Dickhut is, well, as the time you see this, he has just retired from Farmers National Company. He sits in Omaha, but he was at retirement, senior vice president for real estate operations for that company. So you've seen the ad in the newspaper or on your phone or online. We're going to talk about ownership of land. What are the debates that are had with families who might just be two siblings or third generation ownership that aren't directly related? What's good, what's bad about that? We'll have that discussion. A couple of interesting stats that you'll see here. I'm looking down at my notes. About 60 to 80% of those who are buying land. So you'll have to listen in for that one. And we'll also talk about the emotion of agriculture. If you have any feedback on this topic or others, send me an email, or if you've got an idea for a podcast, paul.yeager, Yeager at iowapbs.org. That is my email. I'd love to hear from you. I enjoy hearing from those of you who do send emails and give me tips. We're always working on the next episode. So now let's go to Randy and discuss farmland. How's life along the Missouri River this time of year? What's the favorite time of year for the Missouri for you?
I think summer really is. Summer's really a great time in this neck of the woods, I think. Right now, we're been dry all season long. Past couple of years been on the drier side, but there were some good crops last year. This year, they're not going to be as good because it's just drier. But we're not as dry as farther west, so we're fortunate that way.
But let's be honest, you do tell the people in Omaha, you're like, this Missouri's pretty, but you should see the Mississippi.
Well, the trees are different. There are more trees. We're starting to be in the real plains here. So there's definitely a difference between this and farther east.
So Quincy native? Tell me about your life there.
Yeah, I grew up on a grain farmed with my father and brother through high school, college, and 20-some years after that. Involved in Farm Bureau locally and on the state level, and passionate about working at the farm causes and stuff at that time. But then came to a point I wanted to kind of mid career. I wanted to do something different, and I answered an ad in the local paper to be a farm manager for Farmers National Company in Western Illinois and Northeast Missouri, and that suited me well because I enjoyed working with our clients, with farmers, and analyzing, the farm leases and such.
So, yes, you say mid-career, but you kind of have it backwards for what some people do. They have the off-farm job, then they go farm after they acquire some money or capital. Did you think of did you go to college to study for agriculture, or did you just jump in?
No, I have a bachelor's degree in accounting, which I thought if I couldn't farm, I'd be go into the accounting field. But the accounting, as today's farmers realize, is a good background for operating today's farm. And, I got out of farming in 2002, so it's been 20 years since I, did that, but it's even more complex today. So that all worked out well. I loved farming, enjoyed all of it. It just kind of things change as you get a little bit farther along in your life.
Tell me about life as a farm manager, because there's some that will swear at them, but others that swear by them. How do you describe a farm manager?
Well, a farm manager is a very unique position. It's a great profession. You have a lot of responsibility, have a lot of leeway, autonomy in most cases. And it's really gratifying helping out the landowner clients. And, these are the non-operating landowners typically. Many live quite a distance from their farm. So we become the fiduciary agent for them. And that's a higher level of responsibility than a customer, we'll say. And so that's real gratifying when you can take their farm and give them recommendations to improve the conservation measures, save soil, improve soil health, put irrigation on it, or improve it, make it better leasing arrangement for them, and such. And many times act as a almost like a third party for a family ownership. Today's generational transfer of farmland is getting, instead of one or two mom and pop or grandparents owning it, or a couple siblings. Now it's going to third, fourth generation, where there's five. Excuse me, sorry about that.
That's fine.
5 or 6, 7 or 8 owners in it, and they're all spread over. And so the farm manager becomes one who can work with them all, communicate with them all, and help them out. And it's also gratifying work with the farmers. And yes, some farmers don't see farm managers in as good a light as maybe the clients, but farmers are also pretty competitive when it comes to renting land.
Yes, and you kind of could tell where my question was going when I wanted to discuss this whole maybe more generations removed from the farm, but wanting to maintain farm ownership. I've had previous guests on this podcast hold up for maybe 3-4 generations that's the way it should be, and then there's a realization of maybe it's time that passes on and gives someone a fresh new start. How do you navigate those discussions?
Well, we act, according to what the goals are, whether we're acting as a broker or the manager to give the best advice. And that's usually based on what we've seen others do. You're exactly right. I kind of liken it to, when the farm was worth $200,000 and it was split 4 ways. Well, the rent they got was okay, but what it was worth wasn't a big deal. But today that farm's worth a couple $1 million, split 4 ways, we'll say. And that's real money. And that has changed some of that thinking as those non-operating owners inherit that and they get further removed from it and stuff. So our job is to lay it all out. You have options. A lot of people will call us and just think, oh, they're locked into selling the farm to the tenant or keeping it, whatever leasing arrangement, or not knowing what's going on. And we just lay out through our experience that you have a lot of different options. You can keep it, sell it, work with a new lease or what with the tenant, and make it work better for you, whichever direction you want to go.
There'll be a crowd of people that will say, yeah, Randy, that's great, but I used to do all these things with a handshake. And I don't need someone taking a percentage of whatever. However, it gets back to protection. And when, just like what you said, the dollars accelerate. And that really changes the discussion. Is that what you found?
It does. I farmed for time through high school, about 30 years. And that, like most typical farm boys, I say, you start very early and doing everything. And during that time, my brother and I maintained some leases that my father had that were just all verbal. Most of the leases we had were verbal and very common at that time for 40, 50 years. And a lot of farm leases go multi-generation with the owner and the tenant on it. So, there's usually no problems. It's a great way to do business, but sorry to say, this day and age, it's like everything else going on around us. If you really want to have it down, put it in writing. It just makes it clear so that nobody's has a question of if something happens to either the owner or the tenant, everybody's knows what's going on and stuff. And so it has changed. We'll argue another time for better or for worse. That's another whole discussion,
Yeah, I was going to say that was going to be a question, but I knew that yes, that could be an hour's argument.
It's just the way it is, and again, we just tried to make it all work. The farm manager's job, broker, is trying to get communication. We're problem solvers and communicators, and so depending on whose problem, we're trying to give them options and help them solve it.
So how'd you make the transition from farm management to the real estate side?
Well, I first stepped in to be vice president of client relations, working in the farm management area of the company. So I did that for 7 years, I guess it would be. And that worked very well because I was working with and talking with new clients, existing clients, working with our managers and others in the company and our accounting and our customer service to be sure that we're providing the service to clients. And so that transition was easy because it was kind of doing the same thing. I grew up farming and leasing and farm manager and stuff. And then in 2013, about 9 years ago, I transitioned into the head of the real estate operations here. And so, again, because I've been working in the company with the same people, farm managers and our real estate licensees, agents, and other people in the company, it's just a very easy transition because we're large in what we do at Farmers National, but small in the scheme of things with size of the company. So you get to know everybody pretty well.
I'm going to go back to the first thing you said about how you ended up with Farmers National. I think of the newspaper ad, and I still look at the newspaper on Sundays, and I see your logo and the others that are selling land auctions. How that seems to me still harkens back to a day when it's in the paper, but I'm guessing there's been a little more transition about letting people know that a certain parcel is going to be up for sale.
Absolutely. You hit one of the prime changes going on and has been going on for a little while here. But, when websites became more important, putting your listings there and your auctions and stuff, then it became about SEO, search engine optimization, as we pretty much all know. And then the next step was social media and getting it out to the most people. And yes, we do print. Print is important to be out there, but we're examining, what gets you most bang for the buck, and with different ways of doing the various social media campaigns and who you can reach at a lower cost is very, very interesting. And I think any brokerage today is absolutely doing that. And used to be you had to have a full complement of people or hire expensive outside expertise, and today the cost of that has come down. But so yeah, we're all as I mentioned, the phone rang, everybody's on their phone, and that's how you search for things today. Our hunting leases as a company, most of those are searched by, I think it's 3/4 or more are found on their phone. So when we want to know something, we want to know it. We don't want to have to go back to the office or our homes and look it up.
What's the distance from where the land that's for sale and a potential buyer? I mean, it used to be always, I'm guessing, within 2 to 10 miles.
Mm-hmm.
Is that more like 200 to 1,000 miles away now, potential buyers?
Well, it's interesting with the online and simulcast auctions, what we do, others where they're online and the public outcry, auction going on, and it's all transparent and posted, to everybody at the same time. Farmers, are still buying 60 to 80% of good farmland that comes up for sale. They're always going to be interested in that, farm next door or just down the road that they've been driven by for 20 years and hadn't sold for 3 or 4 generations. So they're always going to be active bidders and buyers. It makes sense. Next are local investors that aren't too far away. After that, you're right. There are, more individual investors, a few investment funds in certain states that are active buying, a smaller percentage of land. And yeah, today that online bidder can be around the world, or they could be in the room bidding online so that nobody knows who's bidding until it's all said and done. So yeah, it's really changed things over the last few years, especially once COVID put everybody at home.
A whole lot in that answer there that I want to unpack. Let's start with, you're trying to get the most, you need 2 people to be bidding against each other to get a price. And the more people you have at the auction, that's fair statement still, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So where they come from, who should care where the person comes from, because I read on Market to Market's Twitter account of, oh goodness, such and such buyer from California, from Colorado, from Idaho, whatever, is buying this in Northwest Iowa or Southwest Minnesota or wherever it is. You're heading out to the exit door. You can't, but you still have to be, above here. What's that say about those that are interested in buying prime Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin, North Dakota, whatever farmland?
Right. That's a good question, and one that I think, over the centuries has been talked about, debated about in different ways. And we see a lot of that right now with foreign ownership, investment in U.S. farmland, i.e., especially China ownership. It's gotten a lot of attention this summer. Got a lot of questions on that. I think it's a valid question. Some states limit corporate ownership and foreign or alien ownership. Somebody from outside the country, they limit it. So, quite a few states already have some laws in place putting some restrictions on that. Other states don't. If you're the one selling the farm and you want to get top price, you're open, you want everybody to be able, so you don't want any restrictions on who might buy it and bid up that price. But if you're wanting to buy it, you're there locally, you don't want everybody and their cousin out there buying it. So it's a real discussion. I think one thing I'd point out, though, is that in this country, one of the keys that keeps and makes the U.S. a prime place to invest in real estate, again, right or wrong, with some foreign investment there, commercial real estate and stuff, but in farmland, whatever, is the freedom to do so. And our laws support that. And that overall helps maintain that value. So once you own that, you're happy that that farm's appreciating in value. So we don't have the problems that third world countries or developing countries have, where they don't have clear title and ownership of land. And with that clear title comes the ability to sell it to whomever you want. So one side, none of us want to be restricted in what we can do and stuff. And on the other side, farmland is an emotional investment. It's not like buying a stock market. This is something I see, I feel. It raises something that's important to feed the world and stuff. So there's a lot of sides to it, but I think ultimately we all want the freedom to take care of ourselves.
Well, let the market dictate.
Mm-hmm.
And that's market forces are at play in those things.
Right.
I look at some of the plain states and auctions for pasture land.
Mm-hmm.
There's some buyers that are really buying a lot that have very famous names. Is that good for the land industry?
Sometimes if that person, no matter who they are doing the right things conservation-wise, taking care of the land, to be honest, they might do a better job than the individual that maybe is struggling financially. We've all seen that over the years, sorry to say, where that farm or ranch or pasture goes downhill. You see that in Texas and, in other places. And so maybe it's better for the land long term, and all the different things with soil health and carbon sequestration that, are out there coming, going on. But again, that it comes down sometimes to an emotional decision and how you believe and stuff. And again, the great thing is we have the freedom in this country. And sometimes there's some downside. If I wanted as an individual to buy that pasture land or that crop land and couldn't, because I couldn't compete, I'm not very happy.
Right. And it's a trade-off. It is. And it's a trade-off. If I know of a woman or man that wants to buy land near me that, I want to help them out. Yes, you can do a direct sale with them, but you have to trade off that you might not get the price that you think it's worth, but you have to think of who you're trying to. I mean, how do you have that conversation with someone who comes to you? Because once it's open for bid, you can't control who is going to come out on top.
Right. And that's, with an auction, It's pretty much open. And, it's the best way to really know what the market will pay. Private treaty listing or a pocket listing, you can, put some kind of restrictions a little bit on it. But, farmers themselves, ones that are trying to grow their operations, or, I had the same experience when I was farming and had a landowner that wanted to sell their farm, or they passed away and the next generation wanted to sell. And I didn't have, many times, that tenant doesn't have the financial well-being to buy that farm or another farm. And so they're hunting for an investor to buy it so they can lease it. Controlling acres is prime importance for a farm tenant wanting to grow. And so sometimes they're trying to arrange that deal with an outside buyer. And that could be the individual in town, or it could be an investment fund today. So you see all of that going on too in this market.
Do you see a larger percentage of the person who might that you're just describing there that finds an investor and they rent? I guess basically, are there more renters than owners now than what you used to see that are still farming that land that used to? They just don't own it now?
That'll vary by region. There's certain parts of Illinois, the Red River Valley, parts of Iowa where 60 to maybe 70% of the land is leased out. Now, it might be retired farmers, might be somebody living locally, but it also is somebody living, it's inherited the farm, bought it as investment, that's living in the distance. So there's still a high volume of rental land in most places. Farmers only own a certain, typically portion of what they farm, they rent the rest. Again, that varies by state and region. So there's always going to be that, and that ownership change of land is what I see or hear is about 2% of the ag land in the U.S., and that's everything: timber, pasture, cropland, changes ownership in any given year. And over half of that is through, a death or transfer, gifting, or quiet ownership change, and less than half is on the open market. And so a lot of those changes are happening with third, fourth generation owner and tenant, and you don't see a lot of change. So it looks like it sometimes, but really in the scheme of things, it's a small percentage.
Do you see higher values for land as a good thing for agriculture?
Double-edged sword. If you're young and wanting to expand and buy land, it's tough, and it always has been tough to grow a farming operation that way. So high prices may, limit that some more. On the flip side, for those who inherited, owned it, purchased it, paid for it over those 20 years or so, higher values are a good thing. With the higher values, usually also come higher rents to get that return on investment that people want. That's a downside for the tenant, but it's an upside for the landowner. So there's a give and take in that whole aspect. But typically, you'd rather have increasing values and strength in agriculture, especially when 80% or a little more of the overall asset values in agriculture are the underlying land. And so that's good for agriculture overall in the scheme of things.
Yeah, because if I'm 100 miles away from where that land is and the value goes up, I'm paying the higher value in taxes to the county where the land is, but any benefits that I get from higher values are maybe at a community 100 to 200 miles away. So, also that part. Speaking of values, the value of how much it costs to borrow money, the interest rate. What does higher interest rates or lower interest rates mean for those in your industry?
Well, historically, the return or ROI on farmland kind of coordinates or follows the 10-year treasury yield. They kind of follow each other until here recently when treasury rates were below 1%, but farmland returns stayed about 2.5%, 3%. Now with the interest rates going up, that treasury rate's going up. So will we see the return on farmland go up? That's one question. And that happens either by land values coming down or the income going up. That's still to be played out for one. But where interest rates have gone so far on farm mortgages haven't really affected the farm prices a lot. Um, you know, some of the purchases of farmland are with cash only or only a 50% mortgage on it. So a lot of cash in the market still working out for some people. But if those interest rates move up pretty quickly and, significantly more, I think it will have an effect on land values. One is for those having to borrow, will get more cautious, absolutely. And the second is, will you want a little better return when you can go out and get a CD for 4 or 5%? People started thinking of safe investments in farmland historically, but also we've got the inflation piece going on. And again, historically, real estate assets, especially farmland, are considered a good inflation hedge. So you got interest going up, but you got inflation hedge. And again, that's all playing out right now.
What has been the biggest driver? Because land values were going up prior to 2020 dramatically.
Mm-hmm.
And that's pre-pandemic, pre-inflation. What was pushing them higher?
Well, if you look at the farm incomes adjusted for inflation over time, since the 2006-7, that time frame, we've spent more time with better incomes than maybe we had in the 80s and 90s and some other times. We've had a little more years spent above average and a few less spent significantly below average. So farm incomes, the 2019 and 20 extra government payments put cash in people's hands, low interest rates. So looking for alternative investments, farmland became one for individuals and investment funds. And so it brought in a lot of buying demand, and we had a average to lower average amount of land for sale. So the equilibrium worked where the supply was lower, demand was good, and so it drove prices up for all those various reasons.
Is there a canary in the coal mine coming, or what will that be about land values and agriculture's health?
That, again, is a good question. And I kind of like to look back at history and trends, what has happened before. I learned early on in grain marketing and stuff, the adage that in stock market, whatever, that when things go up, sometime they're going to come down. If they go up quickly, they're going to come down sometime. Well, land market went up earlier in the 2000s, and then it came down some and kind of plateaued. And now we've taken a huge jump again, some places 50% over the last 12 to 15 months in value. So underlying aspects are there. Of course, the black swan event of the Ukrainian war, some of those things really threw a unknown into the market. When the market's unknown and it affects our commodity prices in the positive, then that puts that income and underlying support for land values up. That everyone thinks will last for a couple more years at least, working through these shorter crops around the world, these drought situations and stuff. So I think, I'm not sure why or what, other than maybe continued higher interest rates or such, or some other black swan event that will bring the land values down significantly. I wouldn't be surprised if something happened. But yet on the flip side, it's a little different than, we'll say, the 1980s and the farm crisis, when interest rates were so high, inflation was high, and didn't have the buying interest in farmland in the general public like we have had over the past decade or so. And then we have climate change going on. Whatever side you take in that debate, we're getting to the more weather extremes affecting our crop output. And around the world too. So that's going on. And so will all of that continue to support commodity prices and farm incomes and such? So there's more uncertainty now, I think, and a lot of aspects in agriculture than I remember in my whole lifetime, and stuff.
Randy, it's a good time to retire.
There you go. I'll watch from the sidelines
There,
mostly.
there you go. Before we wrap up, I do want to discuss about land usage. Is there any aspect of, I worked in Davenport for a number of years. Scott County land values were always high. Polk County land values in the central part of the state are high. I'm assuming Omaha and Council Bluffs are high. Doesn't necessarily always mean that they're fantastic farmlands or farm ground quality to graze great crops, although it is in Scott and Polk. Um, but that's the proximity to development for houses, for retail. What does that factor into? Is that good for agriculture as we see some of that ag land come out of production and turned into my neighborhood?
Yeah, there's definitely concerns about that. You're weighing that. What is the highest and best use for that land, and therefore the highest price? You can sell that farm for $40,000-$50,000 an acre or more, depending on where it is. Compared to $10,000 an acre. For farming it. So what's the highest and best use? American Farmland Trust does a lot work around that, loss of farmland and have the statistics. It's, very interesting. So it is a challenge. I think there has to be smart development and not just waste the development like the sprawl that, we've seen and probably continue to see. A couple sides of that again, as an individual, my right to sell that farm for $40,000 an acre. And then what happens? They go around and then in turn to a 1031 exchange into more farmland. So they're out buying. So they compete with the local farmer because there's a deadline to spend my $40,000 an acre and buy 4 times as many acres as I had. So that has accelerated land prices in some areas in that competition. The other side, we're losing farmland, but we're also always improving our trend line yields. It may be slow, but there's so much technology out there in the seed and chemical and how we take care of it, how we plant, how we harvest, and so forth. So I'm kind of an optimist and a believer that technology that's going on and being developed now by these companies and what we can raise in the bushels is going to outstrip what we may lose. And the expansion, like we've moved the Corn Belt north into North Dakota and some of those things. Challenges, absolutely, but I think it continues, we get ahead of it. Even though it looks dark, we get ahead of those changes.
Well, yeah, if you think back to when you started farming near Quincy, Illinois, you'd get 150 bushel to the acre corn, you're pretty excited. Now, if you're less than 250, you're disappointed. I mean,
Exactly,
that's changed the discussion dramatically. All right, we'll close with this, Randy. I could do the easy question of what's the highest land sale that you've seen, but what's one of the more interesting stories that you'll take with you from your time working that really illustrates why you do what you do, or what made it so fun to do what you've done?
I'm going to take a farm that I actually started managing. It's a large acreage. It had actually been a livestock farm and went through the generations, and non-operating owner lived far away, inherited it, and it had been, they needed help, and so I helped, as oftentimes farm managers do, liquidate some old equipment and cattle operation over the years, and improve the farm with conservation and drainage and all kinds of different things, and leasing arrangements and stuff. And another one was where I helped do a timber stand improvement. So just personally, the gratification of helping a landowner, and that translates into the brokerage side too. Somebody decides they want to sell, they don't know what to do, they don't know the market. how do I do this? They just have a lot of questions, and helping guide them through. Here are your options. You have ways of doing this. That's gratifying. It's beyond the dollars and cents. In a lot of cases, it's helping them and that family achieve their goals and accomplish what they want to. So maybe a little different, but it's kind of that gratification of helping some people out with some things they need at that time.
Do you have a lot of dinners in people's homes, or do they always meet you somewhere neutral? Because I gotta say, you probably had some good meals having those if you're visiting with those people so many times.
Well, I've transitioned out of with the boots on the ground a long time ago, so I have less of those. But so many of them today, who are selling or who are managing for lives at a distance. So it's become, the phone call, the text, the Zoom.
The Zoom,
And if you're
exactly.
back in the area, we'll meet up
Yeah.
on the farm or something. So yeah.
Well, I appreciate the time and the insight to the industry. It's always fascinating, and I think understanding there are lots of sides to that piece of land, and yeah, it's bad for one person, but it's good for another, and you're just trying to make all that happen. It's America at work, I guess, Randy.
Absolutely. We are so privileged to have options,
Yep.
and 'cause a lot of people around the world don't.
All right, Randy Dickhut, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much, and good luck in retirement.
Okay. Thank you.
If you have any feedback for me here, market at iowapbs.org is another email you can use. New episodes of the M2M podcast, which is a production of Iowa PBS, come out each and every Tuesday. Thank you for watching or listening, and we'll see you next time.